He started running his hands along my thighs. I wanted to get him off me, but I couldn't move. My arms were so tired and I felt helpless. I knew I had to get out of there, so I tried to move my leg, but instead of him leaving me alone, he moved closer. I could feel his breath on my skin. I want to go home, please, I whimpered. When I was 17, I started studying art at college. I made friends pretty quickly and hung out with 3 girls at lunchtime. I loved them, and we all got on well, but I felt something was missing. I guess it was because I'd always got on better with guys than girls, so I was finding it hard to settle. One day, we were walking back from lunchtime, and Grace waved to this random guy, but we were already running late, so we had no time for introductions. I asked her who that boy was, and she said, "Luke, a friend from school." I hadn't seen or heard from him before. Later that day, I got a message on Facebook. It was him! It said, "Hi, I know this is random, but I'm that guy who Grace waved to earlier. I thought you looked cool, so I found your profile and thought I'd message you so we could hang out sometime." I didn't find it weird at all. I thought it was quite funny, actually. "Sure, why not?" I replied. And after a few hours of chatting, it felt like we had already known each other for years, and we arranged to get Subway the next day for lunch. This was before everyone had data and unlimited credit on their phones, so I was nervous that I'd turn up and be alone. But when I got there, he was already waiting outside. We quickly became friends, and I started sleeping over at his house most weekends. Luke lived with his dad, Paul, who always made weird, inappropriate jokes that I didn't feel comfortable with. But because Luke laughed at them, I did as well. We had done a lot together, and I felt happier having a guy mate again. However, we slowly stopped hanging out, and after a while, we completely lost contact. When I turned 18, I started going out clubbing a lot and moved into a flat with some friends. One night, I was out with a flatmate called Cal. We were having a good night, and then I looked across the dance floor and saw Luke's dad, Paul. He smiled a big grin and waved me over, so I went across. "Is Luke here? I haven't seen him for ages!" I shouted into his ear over the thumping music. He pointed at Luke, who was dancing with his girlfriend. I felt so happy for him, seeing him happy with someone. I went over and said hi to him and gave him a hug, but then kind of just left him to it, as he seemed happier dancing than catching up. Cal told me he wanted to go home, but it was still early and I wanted to stay. I told him to go home first. Paul then said, "Yeah, don't worry, she can get in my taxi. We drive past yours anyway, so she can jump out on the way back." Cal eyed him up suspiciously, but I urged him that it was fine and for him to go home. I usually wandered around talking to random people on nights out, but I stayed with Paul as I didn't want to lose sight of him and miss a ride home. Plus, he kept buying me drinks. I was a college student, so I had next to no money. I wasn't going to pass up free drinks. The night went on, and at closing time, we headed out. We got into a car, and at this point, I could hardly see. I felt stranger than drunk, but wasn't sure why. Paul got in the passenger seat, and I sat in the back seat and rested my head on the window, feeling suddenly sleepy. My house wasn't far from town, so after we had been driving about 10 minutes, I felt something wasn't right. I opened my eyes and looked out the window. "Where are we? We've already gone past my house." Paul turned around and said we were going to his to see Luke for a bit. I wasn't up for it, but I didn't have the energy to argue. We pulled up to the house, and I got out and ran upstairs shouting, "Luke!" But he wasn't up there, so I walked back downstairs and asked where he was. Paul then shut the door and locked it behind him. He grinned at me the most sinister smile I've ever seen, and I felt my heart drop as he said, "He's not here." He ushered me into the front room to sit on the sofa and told me to take my shoes off. He sat next to me and pulled my leg up and started rubbing his cold fingers against my feet. He took my socks off and started doing it even harder. I put my feet down, but that didn't stop him. Instead, he started stroking my thigh. "I want to go home," I whimpered. I don't think he heard me, or he just didn't care. I was getting more and more worried by the minute, as nobody else knew where I was. I felt absolutely scared and hopeless. My phone had no battery, and I had no clue what to do, but I knew I needed to get out of there. My vision was getting blurrier by the minute. I said I felt sick and asked for a glass of water, so he stopped stroking my leg and got up to head to the kitchen. At this moment, I saw an opportunity to escape, so I ran for the door and tried turning the knob, but it was locked. "Looking for this?" he said, smiling. No," I stuttered. I thought I was going to be sick, but I think I'm okay now. He put the keys on the kitchen side, and I sat back down on the sofa and turned the TV on. It was 3:30 a.m. in the morning, so I just put a radio channel on. He put down the glass of water, and I took a sip as he sat back next to me. He started stroking my leg again, and I felt like crying, but knew that if I did, I would have just given up on staying conscious. I stayed sitting and just let him do it for a while because I knew if I tried to stand and get out again, it would be too obvious. It made my skin crawl, but it was the only idea I had at the time. After another 5 minutes, I told him I needed the toilet. He made a weird noise and told me to hurry back. The house was quite open planned, so it was hard to sneak around, but I walked behind the sofa and coughed hard as I slid the keys off the table and clutched them tight. I then walked back past him towards the stairs and put my feet on the steps to make it sound like I was going upstairs. I put the key in the door and turned it as slow and as quietly as I could. I heard him stand up, so I swung the door open and just ran. I didn't even get my socks or shoes. I just ran out barefoot in the rain with just a jumpsuit on. I got down the street, then got really disoriented, not knowing where I was as the cold air hit me. I burst into tears from the relief of getting outside, but also the fear of being lost, not knowing what to do or where I was. The only things I could make out were blurs of light from the cars in the distance. After venturing through the streets, I eventually got home, and when I did, all my flatmates were up waiting for me. I couldn't even tell them what happened. I was incredibly shook up, and I passed out so quickly in bed. Luke never spoke to me after that. I never heard from him again, and I never got my shoes back either. I never reported it or did anything about it, and didn't even tell anyone up until a few years ago. I opened up about it a few months ago to one of my friends as she used to date Luke, and I asked her what she thought of his dad. It turns out, a month after the incident I had, he actually forced himself onto her. It made me feel so guilty about never reporting him. I could have probably saved her. I would tell anyone if anything happens like this to you. Don't be afraid or ashamed to report it. You could be saving someone's life. Also, if you are going on a night out, stick with your friends and have some cash on you reserved for a taxi only. You never know what's going to happen.